Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast. All NASCAR, all the time here, part of the Bet the Board podcast network. And we've gone from 16 down to 12. Only 12 drivers remain vying for their share of NASCAR immortality. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host on this very fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, Bristol, up against the backdrop, Saturday night race, college football side by side. I almost felt like I needed a nap watching Kyle Larson completely snooze the field in dominant fashion.
Yeah, this is where you take a look at the Gluck poll and you realize how many Kyle Larson fans there were and how many non-Kyle Larson fans there were, because I think it was something like 23 or 25% voted this a good race. Those people clearly bet Kyle Larson and or are Kyle Larson fans, and the other 75% thought the race sucked. So it is interesting how much that will influence whether you thought it was a good race or not. Myself anticipating a Larson beatdown and kind of betting it that way, yeah, I thought it was a great race. However, I can understand the argument against with very little passing. And there was never the caution that fell during that, do you pit? Do you take 2 tires? Do you take 4 tires? Do you stay out? There was never that option. Everything was clearly a 4-tire stop. Whenever that happens, nothing will jumble up the field. Nothing will take the fast cars and put them behind slower cars and see how they handle. So it was just basically manage lap traffic, manage the gap to the driver behind you, and make sure that your tires don't fail. And you end up with a race where lots of unhappy fans, 75% to be exact.
I mean, look, we'll get a little bit more into it. I want to remind all of our listeners, stage 1, all about the race that we saw last and how we can apply some of those learnings from Bristol to the 7 remaining races on the NASCAR schedule. Stage 2, we'll preview this weekend's trip to 1.5 miles, our first time we go to a traditional high-speed intermediate track since the Coke 600 Memorial Day weekend. In stage 3, like we've done all postseason long, we will hit the reset button and try and share some of the potential opportunities or lack thereof that may exist in the big picture championship market. So, I mean, you talked a little bit about Kyle Larson. I'll say this race for me was almost as boring to watch as what we saw when Martin Truex led about 98% of the laps at the Coke 600 a few years ago. Yep. I mean, Kyle Larson, look, I'm not going to take anything away from his performance, but he was never put in a position of conflict, never shuffled back in the field, never had to try and navigate through super slow cars. The ones he did have to work his way around never allowed other drivers to get to his rear or have a chance. I mean, the 5 car went out there, ran a flawless race. And as a result, when you have one of the longest green flag runs that we've had in Bristol in quite some time, you break records. And Kyle Larson did that over the weekend with the fastest average driving speed, or however NASCAR calculates it based on fewer cautions, you're going to show faster average speed, and that's what Kyle Larson did, snoozing the field. When we look at the 4 drivers that were eliminated, Worm, Burton, Truex Jr., Brad Keselowski, and Ty Gibbs, I guess of that quartet for me, the one that probably surprised me the most coming in was Ty Gibbs. I thought he was going to have a path to success and find a way to advance. Look, Martin Truex, he has been the poster child for being unfortunate throughout the course of the playoffs and preceding that, and bad luck yet again falls right at the feet of the 19 as it's a self-inflicted wound that eliminates his chance to win a second title in his final season.
It was almost a matter of time. Like, okay, Truex is running second. Everything's going fine. Probably doesn't need to win to advance. When does he make his mistake? It's like, oh, the second to last pit stop. That's when he'll make his mistake. He'll go to the rear without cautions. Or there's like,
did he pass another car, by the way? When he went back to the rear, it felt like he was basically in the rear and he stayed there the rest of the race.
He ended up, I think, he almost went 2 laps down. that's how hard it was back there in dirty air. So, yeah, just I think one of those races where, I don't know, it was just a matter of time for the 19, and everyone talks about it, and we're going to talk about it again this week. Is Truex a threat to win? Yes. Is he also a threat to be a lap down? Yes. And he's turned into this almost unbettable, unhandicapable driver where if he's not making a mistake, it's the pit crew making a mistake, whether it's a loose wheel or over the wall too soon, or it's a driver mistake or a strategy mistake. It's always something with that 19 team, and it's never a surprise. Like it was shocking and it was crazy that it happened, but everyone
honestly at this point, I'll be surprised if he can run a clean race. That'll shock me more than anything else.
Race. And maybe we get that this week, maybe we don't. But I think it's just, I don't know. The 19's just kind of been this big question mark for the last few races. As far as Ty Gibbs, I will say this. The one thing he did show is that if you pushed your car hard, you were able to make passes, but to a certain point. He heated up his tires. It looked like he was making a strong run to potentially get up there with Briscoe and make something interesting. But, he put too much heat in the tires early in the run and wasn't able to kind of continue that progress. Definitely a bummer for this 54 team. But I do think that there might be some opportunities in the future with this 54 moving forward this season when it comes to value. Maybe this week, maybe in future weeks. But I definitely think that Burton was a no-brainer to be gone.
Yeah, we knew that Harrison he would have been a bigger Cinderella story, in my opinion, for him to advance other than anything else he's accomplished this season. Yes, I know.
Might have been the biggest Cinderella story in sports. Like, can you think of a bigger long shot if he had just advanced to the Final Four? Like,
I mean, it would have been NASCAR's equivalent for those folks out there that do watch English Premier League. I'm not sure on a Venn diagram there's a lot of overlap between NASCAR fans and English Premier League, but it would have been vintage Leicester City if you'd have told me Harrison Burton was in the Final Four. Not from an odds perspective. He wasn't 5,000 to 1, but you get the gist.
Yeah, I think. And then when you look at Brad Keselowski, I think they just needed more 1.5-mile tracks, to be completely honest. That's where I think that they flexed their muscles in the first half of the season, and they couldn't get over their qualifying woes. And
I think that's the bigger issue for that team. Not just him, but Chris Buescher as well. Every week they constantly had to make up track position because they put themselves behind the 8 ball with what transpired in practice and qualifying.
And they've been really good at stealing track position or taking 2 tires or no tires or staying out and getting the cautions and hanging on to track position. I will say this. I thought that RFK and I guess so the 17, the 6, and then I would throw the 22 in there, Joey Logano. Those guys are so good at maybe getting off sequence, stealing a little bit of track position and making it stick, making that run where they take the lead and everyone else has tires behind them. Let's say there's 20 laps to the end of the stage. They don't fall out of the top 10. They make it to the top 10. They stay in the top 10. They stay in the top 6. And then they're in the mix the rest of the day. There was never a chance to do that this week at Bristol, and both guys struggled. I know that Brad struggled much more than the 17, but you're talking about a guy that I would say a lot of the people that we interact with on Twitter were very high on Buescher after his win the previous week. Like, oh, he's coming back to a place where he's very successful. He stayed in 20th all day long. Like he didn't move. How many cars? I don't even know that cars passed him or passed anybody the whole day. He just kind of sat there and rode around, and probably the most boring race he's ever had in his life. So it's only a matter of time. You continue to qualify poorly. It's only a matter of time where you come against the track where you can't steal track position and all the cars are very similar, and you're just going to kind of finish where you start. And that's what we saw out of the 17. And it was even worse for the 6 car and Brad Keselowski.
Yeah, Brad fell like a brick. Chris Buescher, to his credit, given a lot of the drivers he was matched up with, I think if you would have bet him blindly across the board, you wouldn't have cashed in the outright market, top 5 or top 10. But from a head-to-head performance, the 17 went out there and exceeded odds makers' expectations. So, yeah, we look at Bristol. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we learned a ton there other than maybe the optimism that we had about higher tire wear tires that we thought we could get at Martinsville. Maybe nothing more than a pipe dream, but we'll continue to stay optimistic.
The plan for Martinsville is the option tire that we saw at Richmond. That's the plan. I don't want to speak too soon and get excited, But that's the plan, is to, Bristol's a different type of issue for Goodyear with the speeds and the banking. So I'm still going to stay optimistic that when we go to Martinsville, we're going to see a ton of fall off. Fingers crossed. Going to need maybe hot and slick, but I do think that there's a chance that they bring that option tire. I don't know if that is set in stone yet.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out. So we'll wave the green, white checkered flag on stage 1 and move into stage 2. But before we do that, I want to encourage all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners, to follow Chris on social media at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, though, for all things Bet the Board podcast related, follow the pod at Bet the Board Pod. And be sure to subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter delivered right to your inbox each and every Friday. If you're a college football fan, an NFL fan, or a NASCAR fan, it serves as a great reminder for anything that you may have missed from a content perspective throughout the busy fall schedule. And when we look at stage 2, Worm, it's all about the individual drivers, like we've done pretty much each and every week throughout the course of the season. We divvy things up, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We'll focus a little bit more on playoff drivers, but do want to get your take on some of the potential outliers that can crash the party. And when we look at tier 1 drivers, there's a clear line of demarcation between 3 drivers and everybody else. Yeah. I mean, Kyle Larson, he opened his short at 2-1. At a large national book. I think that price is ridiculous, but you are seeing a consensus 3.5 to 4-1 favorite right now. And when we look at Larson, top speed ranking at high speed intermediate tracks this year. Kansas history, he won here in the spring over the last 3 Kansas races. His average finish is a series best 2.3. I don't think we're splitting the atom telling people, hey, look, the 5 is going to be good here. And if the 5 wants to have a rocking chair second round of the playoffs, win in Kansas, kick back, throw your feet up, because we know super speedway racing ain't his forte. And the last thing he wants is to be in a position at the Roval where he's got to go out there and accumulate points, even with a 39-point cushion coming into this round.
Yeah, this is an interesting spot. I think Kansas, just in general, I think that this is truly a driver's track. And if you look at the 3 races in this round, it's Kansas, Talladega, and the Roval. Winning at Kansas in the playoffs here will help you sleep easy the next 2 weeks with all the unknowns that we've had. I think that obviously you have the question marks with plate racing, and I do think that this car has struggled enough at the Roval for it to keep drivers and crew chiefs awake at night, because ultimately it will come down to strategy. It doesn't matter how good your car is. If you're not on the right strategy, you could see yourself exiting this playoff run early, even if you have a fast car. So I think winning at Kansas, you will see these guys get racy. I anticipate if there's not that I want there to be a green, white checkered, but at Bristol last week, we saw a lot of drivers just happy where they were running, whether that was William Byron, Alex Bowman, Daniel Suarez. All those guys weren't forcing the issue because they didn't have to. Survive in advance. If you have a chance to win here at Kansas and take the next 2 weeks and just relax a little bit, you're absolutely going to do everything in your power to do it. So that's why I do think you see these short prices on Larson and Hamlin. Can Kyle Larson win? Absolutely. Is he coming off one of the most dominant performances we've seen in NASCAR history? Yeah. But if you go back and you look at this Kansas race, early in the race in stage 1, Ross Chastain gave him fits, and I didn't think Chastain was going to be that strong. I thought he qualified well. I didn't think he was strong in practice, but he was able to go back and forth with this 5 car for a long time. Not to mention, the way that this race ended, there were other guys that were faster at times than Kyle Larson. I think that this is a pretty short price. If you get involved with Kyle Larson now, you're anticipating a top 3 qualifying position. If he qualifies outside of that, you're probably losing a little bit of value. So do I think Larson can win? Yes. Do I think he can go out and dominate and win in a Bristol-type fashion? Yes. However, I don't think this price is going anywhere, so why get involved at this point in the week?
Well, Denny Hamlin, the other driver you mentioned, pretty much 5-1 painted across the board. And when we talk about Denny at Kansas, he was 5th in the spring here. And over the last 3 Kansas races, Hamlin's ranked number 1 in terms of total speed, pretty much every race. There's a good chance and a case that could be made that he could be 3 for 3, if not for late cautions coming at an inopportune time. When you look at how Hamlin has raced here in the next-gen era, 1 win, an average finish better than 3rd. Best next-gen speed ranking, 2nd best driver rating. He's the only driver who's 5 for 5 at finishing inside the top 5, so it's only fair why he's priced at 5-1. But again, Denny Hamlin, much like Kyle Larson, I have a feeling this number could actually get shorter, though. If Hamlin goes out there, puts it on the pole, we could be talking about him at 7-2. I can't see Denny's number drifting further, even if he were starting this race 18th to 20th.
No, I think Denny kind of made his bed for his odds at this track forever when he came out on Actions Detrimental and said, it doesn't matter how we look in practice or qualifying, we're going to be good in the race. And it certainly showed. If you look at Kyle Larson's finishes over the last 3 times that they've been to Kansas, it's 2-4-1. Denny Hamlin 1-2-5. I don't know what you really expect me to say about these guys other than, yeah, absolutely they can win. I could see Denny's price shortening up, if anything, but I also don't see him going off short of 3.5 to 1. It doesn't matter how he looks in practice. He's going to be short. He's also a driver that I would say could be off a tick relative to Kyle Larson. I think Kyle Larson's going to show up with speed no matter what. This 11 car, I'm not saying that they're hit or miss. Absolutely not. But I do think that the 5 has had just a tick more speed than the 11 at this point in the season. So, this is kind of a wait and see. I have seen some prices out there where, if you were to just bet Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin and called it a day or called it a weekend, I would say, yeah, that's fair enough. I understand why you're doing that based on their finishes, based on how they're running. And I think that there is a little bit of urgency to win this race. Like I said, no one wants to go into Talladega with a question mark. No one wants to go into the Roval with a question mark. You can get rid of that by a win here at Kansas, and I anticipate both Hamlin and Larson being right there.
Now, for me, and if you disagree, by all means, go ahead and tell me. Tyler Reddick priced at 7-1 feels extremely short. And when I look at Brad K being priced at 8-1, I said there was no chance I wanted a part of him at Bristol. I feel the exact same way about Tyler Reddick this week at Kansas. In terms of his overall history, he finished 20th here in the spring. 3 of the last 5 trips, he's finished 20th or worse. When we look at high-speed intermediate tracks, though, the 45 has been good. Second best average speed ranking so far this season. He did win at Michigan, had the best average finish, second best driver rating. There's a lot to like about the 45 in general, but when we talk about how short the prices are in Hamlin and Larson, I can't see Reddick going off at 4-1 or shorter, no matter how he looks in practice.
Yeah, he did win here this race last fall, but he was still, arguably the 4th best car. You could even throw Bubba Wallace ahead of him when it comes to, obviously, Larson and Hamlin were both better, and Bubba Wallace was arguably right there. So, yes, I do think that maybe when he opened at this kind of 10 to 11 to 1 range, I could see that shortening up, now kind of 7 or 8 to 1-ish. Again, I don't see that dropping. Even if he puts it on the poll, we've seen maybe a handful or less of 6 to 1's closing price on Reddick, and those were on road courses in the past. So I think if you got the 10 or 11, you still are going to need a solid qualifying to beat the market. Otherwise, I think you'll see it again. The high line really has to come in. But what we saw last race, and I thought this was quite interesting, that when it came to the exit of turn 2 and turn 4, drivers weren't actually running the high line. They were starting to dime in the corner because there was so much rubber built up off the exit of 2 and 4 that it just became slimy. So that kind of negates a lot of Reddick's, speed on the straightaway when he can't stay on the high line. So I know that that's more of a racing topic, but if you kind of equate that to odds, I don't think he should be the 7 to 8 to 1 range. I didn't mind plays at, that, like I said, the 10 to 11 to 1, but gosh, I think you can wait on Tyler Reddick this week. I anticipate him to be strong, but he's actually floundered a little bit these last 4 or 5 races. We haven't seen that out of the 45 team at all this year. So I think if they get back to the basics, they'll have a solid run. I think they'd be happy with a solid run. I don't know that 7 or 8 to 1 warrants a bet at this point in the week.
Yeah, when you look at Reddick over his last 5, only 1 finish better than 10th, and this is a driver that's been the model of consistency this year that has 7 podium finishes on his resume, 11 top 5s, and 19 top 10s, which is a series best, but didn't exactly go out there and light the world on fire each of the last 2 races. Again, was afforded that luxury, didn't need to, so you wonder if he clicks it into high gear starting at Kansas.
To your point, his last 5, his average finish is 17.7. If you look at the last, 7 races before that, his average finish is 3.2.
Oh, he could do no wrong. I mean, and again, we talk about it all the time with some of these drivers. Did you peak too early?
Yes.
And can you regain some of that form? It remains to be seen with the 45. When we go from tier 1 into tier 2, we'll call it 12s or wild with the prices available for a lot of these drivers. Almost felt like odds makers went to hell with it. We're just going to price these guys the same and let bettors tell us where we're right and where we're wrong. And those drivers include William Byron, Christopher Bell, Ryan Blaney, and Chase Elliott. And they're kind of the only drivers that I would call tier 2 guys the way they're being priced. When we look at William Byron, if you can figure out the 24 and when he's going to flip the switch, it's going to allow you to create all sorts of upside and opportunity in the betting market. I mean, he was 23rd in the spring here over the 5 in the next gen era at Kansas. Byron has the 12th best total speed ranking and an average finish worse than 12th. When we look at Christopher Bell at high speed 1.5 mile tracks over the last 2 races, Bell was great. Won Charlotte, finished 6th at Kansas. But if you take the season and a snapshot with a little bit more of a 10,000 foot view, not exactly ideal. Kansas, though, has been one of his better tracks, and he's consistently finished between 3rd and 8th. Ryan Blaney, 12th in the spring, next gen at this Midwest track type. He has been consistent. 4 or 5 trips here, he's finished between 9th and 12th. We'll see if that continues. And then there's a driver at 12-1 that you and I talked about before we started rolling that we'd love to see this price drift out on Chase Elliott. You can make the case, and again, it is a little bit of a leap of faith, that Kansas has been one of his better tracks. And this is a guy who, when you get to these high leverage situations, doesn't make mistakes. Car seems to get better all the time, but all 4 of the drivers are just rattled off. 12-1. Anyone that intrigues you, or is this kind of a wait and see for this quartet?
Well, I would say the one that would intrigue me would be Chris Bell, and I think that's just based on his qualifying efforts here. The other thing, too, is on these 1.5 mile tracks in this intermediate package, Chris Bell kind of needs to qualify well for him to work his way up through the field. If this was the short track package and we were at Richmond or we were at, at Phoenix, I would say it doesn't matter where Chris Bell qualifies. He can just go ahead and run through the field because he's been that much better in that particular package. But when it comes to this 1.5 mile intermediate package, he has not been as good relative to the field. So I do like, if I were to pick one based on, those out of those 4, I would say Chris Bell, just because of the qualifying that we've seen out of him. However, not driving through the field like we've seen or leading as many laps on this particular package as we have. Now, I know you look back and you say, but Werme, he won at the Coke 600. Yeah, well, Larson wasn't there, and Allgaier was kind of running, low teens. And Brad Keselowski drove from the back and was way better than him in the long run. So there's definitely an argument against Chris Bell and his success at the Coke 600. However, I do think he's the best at that 12-1 price just based on his ability to qualify. If he qualifies well, he'll be good. William Byron, man, if this had been the first time around at Kansas, I would have said 12-1 would have been a great price. However, he did start in the back. Was able to work his way up, but whenever you're back with the squirrels, you have a chance to get your nuts busted, and did not have quite the run that we thought he would have. Awesome here in practice in the spring, but wasn't able to translate whether it was just dirty air or struggling getting through traffic, not the speed we thought we'd see out of him. And that's kind of been a trend recently out of this 24 car. Gosh, early in the year, I swear, I ruined this guy's career by comparing him to Jimmy Johnson, because the minute I compared him to Jimmy Johnson, he hasn't done anything worth a damn. So I'm sure I should write him an apology letter. I think 12 is probably where William Byron should be. Ryan Blaney, I want to wait on Ryan Blaney for this reason only. He's very, whatever he does in practice is very indicative of how his race will go. This week at Bristol, not his best track, also not his worst track. I thought he was probably a top 3 car. He started 22nd, and he drove all the way up to 6th place, which is an incredible drive at Bristol because he had to pass all of those cars under green. There was no way you were just going to pick up spots on pit road or you were going to steal track position. He actually drove his way there. And this, however Ryan Blaney looks in practice, he's also a guy that you can take at 6, 7, 8-1. We've seen him as short as like plus 650 at Martinsville in the past, and he's gone out there and dominated. The same at Phoenix. So I do think maybe wait on Blaney because you'll just get a chance to see what he looks like in practice. And what he looks like in practice is kind of how he's going to race. And you'll be able to match up that performance in practice with a race price. Chase Elliott, the exact opposite of Ryan Blaney. You could look at his practice and say he's good, he's bad. I'm not quite sure. But I'll tell you one thing that they are doing is they're operating as a top 5 contender for the championship. They're not making mistakes. They're making the right calls on pit road. And the driver is just kind of getting the best out of his car. I thought he was the 4th best car after practice for Hendrick Motorsports going into Bristol. What did he do? He made 0 mistakes. He got his car better throughout the race, and he finds himself in a P2 with a great second-place run, which I thought passing Bell and Hamlin, I thought those were both better cars, but over the course of the race, that 9 team got that car better. Chase Elliott made no mistakes, was able to kind of save his stuff, and finish second place. I think that's what you need to do in the playoffs when you don't have your best, the best car or the best speed. So, unfortunately, this 12-1 price is acting like he's got kind of top 6 or 7 speed. I think that, again, he'll probably be the 3rd or 4th best Hendrick car after practice. So that's why I don't like the 12-1 price, but I do like the way that this team is operating. I don't know if they have the speed to go there and get to the Final Four, but they're certainly, executing on a top 4 level right now, which is what you need in the playoffs. You can survive off of that until you get to the Final 8, and that's where he could fall off. But gosh, 12-1 right now. I'd rather see him in practice. I think you'll see a higher price after practice qualifying.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing about the 9. It's all about market entry, and he's a guy
exactly.
that I've identified in head-to-head matchups this week. And while, unfortunately, we're in a world where there aren't that much in the way of head-to-head matchups widely available at national books, one of the prominent shops out here in the desert does post a little bit more extensive menu. And you look at some of the prices that are there, I can see a scenario where his numbers drift out. And regardless of how he looks in practice, I'd feel more than comfortable betting him as an underdog, given some of the matchups that are currently listed. So he's a guy that I think you take the wait and see approach to properly time some of your market entry. When we get into tier 3 and we look at some of the other familiar names, I mean, Joey Logano priced anywhere from 25 to 30-1. I mean, there's Alex Bowman. I've seen upwards of 40-1 out there on the 48 car. And Chase Briscoe, a driver that we helped move the market earlier in the week. We took some of the loftier prices that were out there. But when we're talking Joey Logano, I mean, so far in 2024 at high speed, 1.5-mile tracks, Logano has typically been a low double-digit to mid-teens driver, and for the season minus Kansas. I mean, he finished 34th here in the spring, has really struggled in the next-gen era trying to find consistent speed, especially at this track. Meanwhile, Bowman, 7th in the spring since 2018. If we back out a race in the spring of 2021 where he had alternator problems beyond his control, I mean, he's been a perennial top 10 contender. And then Chase Briscoe, a guy that you and I believed in coming into the playoffs. We thought he had a path. He's got his work cut out for him, as all of the drivers currently below the cut line. But we look at those drivers, we'll call them all pretty much 25 to 30-1. Just wanted to get your quick take on them before we look at some of the non-playoff drivers that may have shorter prices.
I wish I had a recipe on how to bet Joey Logano. I just don't. It's crazy that both my mom and my stepmom love him and want me to bet him top 5 every week, because Joey Logano just kind of finished his top 5. And that's actually a fairly profitable way to go. However, based on my explanations and what I require in order to bet a driver, you just don't see the speed out of him. Here's what I anticipate out of Joey Logano. I think he will be below average in practice, qualify 10th to 15th, never really be a threat to win the race, and then just finish 7th. That's kind of how I feel Joey. And I have no idea how. I just think that between Paul Wolfe and Joey Logano and his talent, he's going to finish better than his average running. But that's just impossible to handicap. When it comes to Alex Bowman, quietly just getting things done, scoring points, did quite well in the first round of the playoffs, hung on nicely for a top 10 last week. I thought he was slightly better in practice than he was in the race. I'm not sure if that was just poor adjustments or just a testament to how well he qualified. You're continuing to get paid if you invest in Alex Bowman, whether it's a top 10, whether it's in matchups. He's just solidly getting the job done. Where I think Alex will have an issue is if he slips up in qualifying or he ends up starting 24th or 25th. This is where I think just the speed is not the same as some of these other cars, the 5 or the 11, where they can just make passes and drive through the field. So if they continue to operate at a high level and just keep the mistakes to a minimum, he could find himself slowly advancing just based on execution. However, I just think they're a tick off on speed. Chase Briscoe, man, not good here typically. Average finish over the last 3 races here, 32nd, 19th, and 21st for an average of 24th. His average qualifying is 22nd. There is literally nothing in his track history that says that this guy warrants a bet. If anything, it's fade him across the board. However, we saw this last year with Ryan Blaney coming out of nowhere and finding some speed. We did see Chase Briscoe he showed speed last week. He showed speed at Watkins Glen, and he also showed speed at Darlington clearly. I think this 14 team has found something. Now, I am not betting Chase across the board. This is not a ladder bet, okay? I am not just chasing this guy all over the field on every bet possible. I don't like him in matchups, but I did take a shot. We took a swing at the 60-1 price opener. I think if you can get him over 45-1, I think that warrants a play. We also took a little bit of there was a top 10 on some some locals at plus 220 that we took a swing at. I don't like the plus 160 price because here's the thing. I think there's a chance he could lay an egg. He could end up being a guy going a lap down 45 laps in this race or 50 laps in this race. And because that's all we've seen out of him at this track. However, if they do unload, they qualify in the top 10. He is not rushing straight to the back. I've gone through a phase where I thought he was a great driver and a wheelman to, well, maybe he's blah. Now I'm back. This guy's a wheelman. I do have a little bias, I guess, because we were sitting on this 200-1 for the championship. But
just give us a puncher's chance. That's all we ask. A little bit of a sweat.
He's also a guy that he might not be great this week at Kansas, but if he can get a solid finish, I trust him at Talladega, and he's certainly a driver that can get things done on the Roval. I could see him advancing with no issues, but I do think that some of the outright prices on him, when they open him at 60, I like him over. I thought that was a good bet. I also like him over 45-1, and if you can get over 2-1 on a top 10, I also think that's a good bet. I think that we'll know after practice and qualifying where Chase, if he qualifies like 18th or 19th, you can just rip up those tickets because he's got no chance. But if he does qualify in the top 10 or even the top 5, he could be there to make some noise because although Darlington's not a direct comp and the fact that it's a mile and a half, I do think that the high line and saving your tires and tire wear does have a little bit of correlation. So I'm hoping that kind of continues for Chase Briscoe.
When you look at some of the non-playoff drivers and some of the usual suspects, we see some shorter prices that are out there on the likes of a Martin Truex Jr., Ty Gibbs, Brad Kay, Chris Buescher, and then some longer shots in a Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain. But the floor is kind of yours to paint with whatever strokes you'd like for drivers outside the top 12 that you feel can play a role in a race-winning outcome this weekend, or guys that can exceed how they're being priced. No disrespect meant to the Austin Cindrics and Daniel Suarez's of the world, but I don't see either of those drivers factoring prominently into the building of our portfolios this Sunday.
No, I mean, Daniel Suarez last week was a pylon out there. I mean, he was just in the way of everybody. And there was actually a funny quote. I was listening to the 5 radio, and they were talking about how his lap times were falling off so much. And Cliff Daniels was saying, like, I don't know if there's something you can do to kind of save your tires a little bit. We did have a little like right front cording, and Larson said, yeah, I can put the 99 a lap down quicker. And that would be his answer. So I don't think Suarez or Cindric will be much of an issue moving forward as well. But if you want to talk about non-playoff drivers, Truex is a mile and a half track. It's based on speed, top 5 guy. Based on finishes, bottom 5 guy. I just, if he makes this mistake early in the race and it's not race ending like it was the last Kansas race this time last year where he ran over something on pit road, hit the wall, game over. He's a top 5 guy. He was also going to win the race in the spring. He was good on fuel. He ran Denny Hamlin down from 4 seconds back down to, 7/10. He was good on fuel. Hamlin was cooked in the spring until that caution came. Truex was going to win that race. Also, if the green-white checkered, if they had done another green-white checkered, he was the only guy on 4 tires. I think he finished 4th, but I mean, that 4th could have easily been a 2nd. I think he wins the race in many different fashions in the spring. So that same token, he could speed, in the middle of stage 2 and just never see the front. So I hope you like my handicap on Truex.
Very helpful.
Other than if he
a wide range of outcomes, top 5 to outside the top 36
to
down.
25th. So Go ahead and slot your bets in somewhere from there. I do think Ty Gibbs does present a little value at this 20-1 price. I do think that there is an element of racing in the playoffs where you no longer advance. This weight's lifted off your shoulder. You no longer need to be perfect. You can go for wins, swing for the fences. I do think last week was very heartbreaking for this 54 team. I thought that Ty had kind of done everything he needed to do to advance. Unfortunately, a speeding penalty at a track where there was just no passing, and there was nothing that this 54 team could do from behind the wheel to strategy to adjustments in order for him to advance. He was one of the few drivers, though, that could make passes. I would say I don't like him necessarily in matchups at this point in the week. And by the way, there's not that many matchups up. I mean, the best bets that we're choosing from.
I think we counted about 6 at a national book and none at another. I mean, it's getting to be worse and worse. You figure with the various national partnerships that NASCAR has with these operators, there'd be a little bit more of an offering early in the week. I know football season is king and everything else takes a back seat, but good Lord almighty, there's nothing.
I mean, imagine just choosing from a pool of like 6 or 7 options every week now. Now I'm making excuses for the best bet, which I shouldn't. But man, when Superbook was available at most states, we could find something at Superbook, and now we're relying on some of these places that just don't offer much. But when it comes to Ty Gibbs, I do think that a 20-1 price there's a little value there. I certainly think he can qualify well. And they can take chances and try to win races. And whenever you're making an outright bet, you want to make sure that your guy's not going to be holding back. Ty Gibbs does not give a shit whether he finishes 3rd, 8th, 15th, or 20th. If he has a chance to win with a strategy call, or he can maybe make it 3 wide where he's either going to go to the lead or he's going to just sail it off into 1 and hit the wall. He can actually make that decision. So I think now we could see a chance for Ty Gibbs to win. 20-1 is not a terrible play. Brad Keselowski. This guy, I would say, just needed more 1.5-mile tracks. The last time we were at 1.5 miles was the Coke 600, as Todd pointed out earlier. Chris Bell won that race. Kyle Larson was not in it, but I don't think it mattered. I think that Brad Keselowski was way better than Chris Bell, and Chris Bell even said it during the rain delay that, hey, if this thing goes back green, I'm not holding off the 6. However, that just has not translated to any speed in the previous 6 or 7 weeks. So I do think that there is a lot of upside for Keselowski. However, it doesn't matter. He's not going to show it in practice. He's not going to show it in qualifying. You're just going to have to take a flyer on him after practice and qualifying at a super high price because we just don't know. There's not been one time when we've looked at practice and qualifying and said, RFK is the best. They just don't do that. That's not their thing. They're more like Denny Hamlin, where they just are looking for a feel in their race car. Once they have it, yes, they're good to go. So I think you can wait on Brad Keselowski, parlay that into Chris Buescher, same thing. I think last week surprised a lot of people. The lack of passing, inability to steal track position really hurt RFK in general, and especially the 17 team. I think they'll race well, but I don't anticipate a good effort on Saturday, which is when they're going to practice and qualify. So again, you can probably wait. I know there are a few people that were shocked. I was getting texts. Can you believe Buescher opened 20-1? I was like, Yep. I mean, what has he done recently outside of the win at Watkins Glen? What has he done in a 1.5 mile track? What has he done to actually put himself in position to win races? Now, I understand how they think that 20-1 equates to the fact he's going to be matched up against guys like Suarez. That's not going to be the case. I mean, he's not. That's not how that works. Those are completely different pools. Sure, Buescher at 20-1 might seem like a good bet, but the other bets where you can make money on Buescher are top 5, top 10s. That's where I like him. Could have easily won this race. Unfortunately, got bested by Larson. Again, don't anticipate a good Saturday. So if you don't have a good Saturday, you're going to get some elevated prices on Sunday. Bubba Wallace, not the same car we've seen out of him versus the 45. I think there's a clear line of demarcation between 45, 23, and it's kind of been that way the whole year, whether it's just speed and or execution. The 45's been better. Obviously, he can get it done here, but we just haven't seen the same speed out of him. Last week has to be a great upside for him. Unfortunately, not in the playoffs. I do like Bubba more in an outright perspective than I do matchups, just because it's win or go home, or not win or go home. It's just win or nothing, you know. So I do think there's some upside for that 23 team.
And that'll wave the green-white checkered flag on stage 2 as we break down all the drivers and the guys worth watching this weekend. Moving on to stage 3, Worm, with a quick playoff reset of sorts. And we begin to look at some of the prices. Kyle Larson has moved to the forefront as the favorite. Christopher Bell, Tyler Reddick, Ryan Blaney, Denny Hamlin, William Byron, all widely available in the single digits. You look at Chase Elliott, kind of in no man's land, along with Joey Logano in that 10-12 to 1 range. Prices may vary. And then, of course, your proverbial long shots in Bowman, Cindric, Suarez, and Chase Briscoe. For those folks looking at the standings, Austin Cindric finds himself 4 points short of the cut line. Daniel Suarez 6 points back. Alex Bowman and Chase Briscoe both 7 points back. The drivers with a little bit of insurance and cushion working in their favorites. Kyle Larson 39 points clear. Christopher Bell 24 points clear, and Tyler Reddick 20 points to the good as well. If we're talking more so through a bold prediction lens, more so than, betting lens, the 4 drivers that we're sending home, I mean, look, I'm sending Austin Cindric home, although he could race well at Talladega, so that's a chance for him to, surprise people again. I'm probably sending Daniel Suarez home.
Yep.
I don't love what I've seen consistently out of Joey Logano, and so he's a driver that I think has a chance to pack his bags. And, selfishly, I know we're rooting for Chase Briscoe a bit, so, I'm not sure who the 4 guys that go home are. When you look at some of the numbers that are there, do you see somebody that stands out maybe as surprise that only has 3 more races of being included in the playoff picture?
So here's my thought from a betting perspective. I would say going into Kansas, take your favorites now. I feel like the cream will rise this week. You're not going to see Austin Cindric and Daniel Suarez leading laps this week, whereas you could potentially see that next week at Talladega. I think you could see Austin Cindric put together something at the Roval. So, I've seen some Denny Hamlin at 6-1, boosted up to 7 at some places. If you're going to take Denny, take him now, because when you go to Talladega, you go to the Roval, that's not where you're going to find your value. I do think Denny will have a good run here. I think he gets a little bit of a cushion. I think he's a little bit more aggressive at Talladega than he was at Atlanta. However, after the Roval, we're going to Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville. That's when I would say start chasing the chalk a little bit. That's when the cream will rise. And, at this point, I still think that there's potential upside for Chase Briscoe. Yes, his track history here has been atrocious, but he put together some great performances the last 4 or 5 weeks. If they found something to the likes of what we saw out of Ryan Blaney last year, we could see the same thing out of Chase Briscoe. We've seen him rise to the occasion multiple times, lead laps late in the playoffs in order to kind of advance himself. And you get to Phoenix, he's had success there. But I do think that, if I've had a few messages about Denny Hamlin and how to approach him in the playoffs, my hesitation with Hamlin is if you say Larson, Bell, Reddick, and Hamlin make it to the Final 4, I still think Hamlin's the underdog there. I think you make Bell the favorite.
He has to be, given how he's performed.
I think you have Reddick and Larson are kind of the the middle odds guys, and I think Denny's the dog there. So I think this is one of his best tracks in the playoffs, and then probably Martinsville. So if you are interested in some Denny Hamlin, I would say now is the time to get in. When it comes to Joey Logano, your guess is as good as mine. I guess I'd be shocked if he made it to the Final Four, but maybe not the round of 8. But I don't think it's based on speed. I think it's based on a good finish at Talladega, or a win, or it's stealing track position, or doing the points thing at the Roval. Man, this playoff thing can just flip so much. And until we get to Las Vegas, I think it's really hard to make any predictions, because Austin Cindric could go out there and win the Roval. He could win the Roval. You could see Daniel Suarez could go out there.
I still don't think either of them have a chance to win it. I mean, 65-1 will be a great price if he advances to the round of 8, but I don't see a legitimate path for Cindric to necessarily get the job done. Now, these words could come back to haunt me, but I'm going to state my opinion one way or the other, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, there's going to be issues. We've seen, as we saw in the first round, I thought both Ty Gibbs and Martin Truex Jr. based on speed were top 12, but you don't see them advance. So that's what makes this playoff so interesting. Again, I would say this: if you're interested in any favorites, take them this week, because if they go on to win, they've solidified themselves into the final 8 with with Talladega and the Roval, 2 huge question marks. And you're also getting, whether it's Larson, Bell, Byron, Hamlin, you're also getting them going into Vegas, Homestead, Martinsville, which is where you will see the best drivers run up front. So I'm super interested to see what happens this weekend. I think you could make this the 3rd biggest race of the year behind Las Vegas and Phoenix, because I know that Las Vegas, you win there, you're already into the Final Four. You can kind of concentrate your efforts onto the Phoenix race, and also obviously you have to perform well at Phoenix in order to win this championship. But I'll tell you what, the next 2 weeks, drivers, if a playoff driver wins this race and a crew chief wins this race, they will sleep easy knowing they don't have to worry about Talladega. They don't have to worry about the Roval. And I think that's what makes this week so compelling.
There is no doubt you like the straightforward approach at a 1.5-mile track compared to some of the uncertainty that we'll see from a super speedway. And then, of course, a road course in the elimination race. You can wave the checkered flag and put a bow on this fine episode of the Stay Green podcast. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, it's best bet time. And while we've tried to take our shots with top 10s and some outrights, look, we know the perils and the pitfalls of taking guys at 3.5, 4-1, etc. They're not going to come home at a 55 to 57% clip like we expect. We mentioned the diminished offerings, and Michael McDowell 1 spot short of what would have been a nice payday for us in last week's race. So when we go through the offerings that are out there and try and focus on maybe a head-to-head A versus B, what stands out to you for an opportunity for us to beat the market and get ahead of the curve this weekend?
Well, this bet's going to be just based on speed and qualifying for performance over the last 3 races here at Kansas. We're going to go with Martin Truex Jr. -120 over Kyle Busch. Now, I know that I've just kind of berated this 19 team over the last 45 minutes of this podcast, but you can only handicap speed at a certain point. And when you have 6 matchups to go off of and some very, I guess, juicy top 10 prices, I think it's time to just stick with a matchup. I'm going to go over Martin Truex Jr. over Kyle Busch. And part of the reason I'm doing this is Martin Truex Jr. over the last 3 races here at Kansas has an average starting spot of 6.7, whereas Kyle Busch has 18.7. So right there, if we can get a qualifying where there's a disparity of 12 spots just on average there, you're probably going to beat the market. I'm not saying we keep this position throughout the weekend. This is always something that we could let off of, but right now, -120 Martin Truex Jr. This should not be a contest, in my opinion. If Martin Truex was actually able to finish races, I think you see this priced out at -165 or -170 range based on performance of the 19 versus the 8. the entire year. I understand that Martin's had some issues, but right now we can't handicap that just based on speed alone. I like Martin Truex Jr. minus 120 over Kyle Busch, and that is at DraftKings, one of the 6 matchups we get to choose from.
Sunday, what's the schedule look like for the pre-race poll? Are we returning to regularly scheduled programming from the Werme household?
Yes, it'll be regularly scheduled programming, which will be 1 o'clock Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific for the pre-race poll. And it will be the last pre-race poll that I do where I'm actually drinking alcohol. I'm going to do Sober October. And
you'll be back drinking for the final race of the season, the final 2 races then at least.
Well, the deal was until I have a kid, and he was November 14th. So Sober October and a part of November. But I will still have an NA beer. But yeah, the last thing I want is to I'd be 3 or 4 beers deep and have to
take your lovely wife to the hospital.
Yeah.
Is what you're getting at?
Have her drive me to the hospital. Hey babe, can you drive?
Does that mean you have to abstain from other things that might provide
I will be abstaining
limitations
from
on your driving abilities?
All unhealthy, mind-altering substances. So
right. No ayahuasca tea for Werme. It's going to be a little disappointing during the month of October.
Yeah. I love my ayahuasca on a Monday morning.
You won't get those uncharacteristic outbursts on social media for the next month, as fatherhood is imminent in this man's future. I want to wish all of the loyal Stay Green listeners the best of luck with all of your investments, both pre-week and otherwise. Check out the pre-race poll Sunday morning with Chris. He'll get you updated. I know we promised a best bet that we were going to add to the website. Some extenuating circumstances took us out of the mix. We will get one up there to coincide with all of your NFL actions. Just slide another bet in past your bookmaker for an additional sweat on Sunday. But most importantly, with a head-to-head matchup ticket on Kyle Busch to lose to Martin Truex in your portfolio, we will see you at the window.